Welcome to another race analysis. This is the Norwood Winter Crits. This is the first crit we've had in a while, and it is a windy day. Small field today, only 16 entrants, and as you'll see, a fair few of them didn't finish. I did finish, but I'm not going to leave you in suspense. I finished stone dead last. This race was spicy. A couple of things didn't help. One, I've just finished a big block of base, so I can ride at 200 watts all day, but get me to 300 watts and I am toast. And secondly, there was a strong tailwind down the finishing straight. Because this is slightly uphill, it meant that you didn't get any sit at all, no draft, and so you're doing 400 watts sitting in the wheels. Also, it felt. Coming through the back straight, it was a strong headwind. As soon as you got right up in the wheels, it was pretty good. You can see I'm doing 150, 250 watts in the wheels. But if you're more than sort of 2 or 3 meters off the back, you end up in the wind and it gets hard again. We're using the big straight. We haven't used the big circuit, or I haven't used the big circuit for a couple of years now. We had some COVID interruptions when they had a testing station set up here, and then there were the supercars. But to be quite honest, I don't like this circuit. This corner's too fast. It's not tight enough. There's no real technical aspect to it. You can rail it pedaling through it sort of 50 k's an hour if you want to. We didn't do that today because it was too windy, but I don't really find this circuit challenging in terms of technicality. Let's look and see how it turns out. And we are 1 lap in, and the first attacks start going. Typically in a race like this, if you see attacks going in the first lap, you can sort of sit in the wheels, let people fill the gaps for you, and that's exactly what I do here. I let a few people chase those down. Sit in behind Lockie Ambrose here. I'm now 1 wheel from the back, and all of a sudden Lockie lets the wheel go. Fortunately for me, Nick Clark comes through and he does a massive turn trying to bridge this. But I'm doing 330 watts in his wheel, or as close as I can get to it, 450 watts. And I can tell you what, it does not feel like we're making any headway. Looking ahead, the gap's opening up, there's gaps splintering. Nick pulls the pin, pulls me through, and that's fine, I'll come and do a turn. Again, I'm going to kick it through because I know that the headwind's coming. If we can get in the wheels by the time we come through to the straight, we can recover a bit. Nico Schultz in the red comes through, and fortunately he takes a turn. I figure if we can get in the wheels, we'll be able to recover pretty quickly. But there's still a gap, and this headwind is blazing. Poor old Lockie Ambrose, who's the one who dropped the wheel, he hasn't managed to make it back on. That's his race done. And Nicholas and I have to pull turns to get back on. I mean, this is lap 2. This is crazy. Being spat out the back on lap 2, I'm already at 177, 178 beats a minute. I'm pumping 300, 400 watts, and I'm off the back. Nick Clark's sort of hanging off the back bit too. He's got a long way to go to get back on. And you know what? This really sets the tone for the whole race. I flick the elbow here. Nicholas Schultz comes through. He manages to close the last of that gap. But I'm 2 laps in. I'm at 180 beats a minute, and I am absolutely terrified about what's going to happen. Somehow or other, Nick Clark, who's sitting off the back, he manages to make it back on here. And that is 2 laps of absolute carnage. 3 laps later, I've had a few laps to recover. It's been really surgy. Occasionally it sort of goes down to 0 watts, and then all of a sudden, I mean, here we are in the headwind section again. A surge goes, and I'm up at 600, 700 watts. Again, I'm in the draft. I've got someone just protecting my right shoulder from the wind, and I'm still doing 400, 500 watts just trying to keep up. And I'm still letting the wheel go. Now this here is a really dangerous moment. It's been absolutely strung out. I've been struggling to hold on. I'm near the back. But it all bunches up, and as NorCal Cycling will always tell you, when's the best time to attack? When everyone else slows down. So 4 or 5 guys get off the front, and there's just no real reaction. And again, this is in the headwind, so as soon as there's a bit of a gap, all of a sudden you're punching into a huge amount of wind. I mean, we're still doing 40 k's an hour into a strong headwind, so it's not like the guys in the front are doing nothing. But just up the road, you can see there's a bit of a group, and they're gone. And this is a dangerous move. There's some really strong guys in there. Jared Fife, a new teammate of mine, I don't know what he's running at 360, 370 FTP. He can just go all day. I think Angus Dixon's up there. Some big hitters in the front group. Peter Burgess is up there, and we've got problems. Fortunately, someone sees the danger, and again, coming out of that corner, doing 400 watts in the draft. At this point, I'm not panicking at all. There's a group of 5 up the road, but we've still got 10 people in the group at the back, and it's a small enough group that everyone's going to have to work. And I didn't think this was going to last for very long. We managed to get into a bit of a rhythm. Frank pulls a big turn. Nicola's on the front. Nicola's super strong, but she's absolutely tiny. Sitting behind her is not worth much of a draft, so even in the headwind section, it's not great. No, I was wrong. Peter's in this group. Peter's he's just recently come up from, I think, C grade to B grade. He's an absolute motor, and to be honest, this is the only time in the whole race I got a decent draft sitting behind him. I hop on the front, pull the turn, and again, so for the next little while, we actually managed to start working together. But that group up ahead's a fair way away. They've probably got 10-15 seconds, and I figure it'll come back pretty quickly. Number 274, Sam Bush, pulls a super strong turn. Now, I get back on the front, and I'm not interested in bridging across. I want to pull this back together. I'm a sprinter, and I'm honestly got absolutely no confidence that I'm going to be able to get across that on my own. I mean, I'm already at 177 beats a minute. So I'm just going to pin it at sort of VO2, 120% or so, sit it at 380, 390 watts, and hope that other people are going to play ball. Pull good turns, flick the elbow, and fortunately we're still working pretty well together. Unfortunately, it's not long after that before people start skipping turns, or worse, just pulling out of the line before they get to the front. And this starts to be a bit of a feature in this race, people pulling out and leaving gaps to close, and unfortunately I had to do this again and again and again, just closing these little gaps, and that's how a couple of breaks managed to get up. No big consequences this time. I was able to get straight back onto Nick's wheel, but these started to hurt. Half a lap later, Nick pulls off, and I come through for another turn. I figure at this point the best thing I can do is just sort of sit at that 120%, sort of 380, 400 watts or so. And throughout the race, what that felt like went from 380 watts just sitting metronomic, 370, 380 watts. By the end of the race, that went down to 320 watts, 330 watts, and then once things really hit the fan, it was sort of 280 watts was about all I could hold. And one mistake I made a few times was coming into this corner. You have just finished a pull into the headwind, and then coming around here, there's a little bit of a rise going up towards the start-finish straight. And if you're absolutely on the rivet and you're coming through and you're just in the wind and you're trying to get back up to speed up this hill, it can really hurt. And I remember there were some dark moments trying to get back on the wheels here. People letting gaps open, and here I've got to close this gap instead of letting the two black chrome riders fill it in, and that just hurts up that hill. We've been chasing for what feels like forever, and I mean in reality it's only been 6 or 7 minutes, and we are beginning to get them back. And then Nicola pulls off and leaves me with this gap. Oh, and this is brutal. We're just about to come into the headwind section, and I've just pulled a turn. I'm on the rivet, and I'm just managing to get back on. This is the one photo of me in this race, and you can see the faces of the guys behind. We're hurting. This is not what I wanted to be doing right now. And like I said, just leaving that 1-2 bike lengths of gap is such a big gap to close in this headwind. And I get there, and I mean, I'm at 184 beats a minute. This is hurting a lot. And that was enough to do for Travis Eady. He was the other guy in the black chrome kit, and people are just starting to get shelled. The chase group's getting smaller and smaller, and fortunately though we can see the group ahead just coming back eventually. Frank pulls a big turn. He just about goes out the back. Nick Clark struggling to hold the wheel. Nicholas Schultz here. Nick was so strong today. Even he's rocking and rolling. And as usual, we come out of the bottom corner up to rise, and you just have to hit the power even to stay in the wheels. I can't keep the wheel, unfortunately. Sebastian Zajakowski, I think his name is, manages to fill that gap. And you can see in the rear camera Nick Clark in the blue, but behind him Frank has just gotten dropped out the back. And fortunately for Frank, the pace just begins to slow down as this chase group makes contact with the front of the bunch. That 5-man group went off at 8 minutes into the race. It's now 20 minutes into the race. And I'll tell you what, I have spent a lot of matches trying to get back on. So of course what I'm hoping for is a nice, smooth, easy couple of laps just to recover a bit. And of course that doesn't happen. 10 seconds later, more attacks are going, and I am just on the rivet. At this point I've stopped thinking about whether or not I'm going to be getting a podium or how I'm going to finish the sprint in this race, and more just hoping I can get to the end of it. I mean, 500 watts, I was in the draft, and I'm getting just shelled. So look, I figured a couple of the big chase efforts I've had to put in have been because I was near the back when a break went. So I thought I'd sit near the front, and that way hopefully there'd be some sliding room when the next attacks went. And this one goes, this is 30 seconds after we've come back together, and I can't let this one go. Once again, 4 guys up the road, we're all exhausted, and I put in a really big dig here. I'm sitting at 800 watts still chasing after this. I'm absolutely determined that I'm not going to let another big, strong group get up the road and be forced to chase on again. So I spend another biscuit here, just trying to make sure that I don't have to be in that position again. And I get across to this sort of front group. But as I get across to it, 2 guys from that group head up the road themselves. You can see Frank's TT'd himself back on in the rear camera. But after that massive effort, I've got very little left. I think I'm sitting at 360 watts, and I don't know why I'm still working on the front, but those guys are looking threatening, and so I go as hard as I can and flick the elbow. Look, I know I complained a bit before about other people letting the wheel go. Coming out of this corner, I had absolutely nothing left, and I let a couple of wheels go. Sebastian goes up, and I just can't hold his wheel. I'm doing 450 watts, and I'm just getting dropped. This was my wheel. I let it go, and so I put the big chase in to get there, and this is hurting. I mean, I know I'm sounding like a broken record here, but each of these attacks, each of these little chases are just taking it out of me so much, and they're getting harder and harder to close these little gaps. I don't want to make too big a thing of it, but when Frank skips a turn and pulls out, you know the race has been really hard. Anyway, Frank does. Daniel van der Laan attacks to get across to Nicholas Schultz, and I put in another big dig to try to get across to DVL, and that opens up a little bit of a gap behind me. I'm not particularly interested in trying to bridge across even with these 2. I'm still thinking that I'll do better if I can have a bit of an easier ride and a bigger peloton, but once I've got across to these 2, I'm not going to just drop back to the others. Hopefully they can make it across, because remember, at this point there's still 2 guys up the road. But I'm regretting my decision pretty quickly. Nicholas Schultz is just putting in a monster turn here. You can see he's rocking and rolling on the bike. I'm sitting in his wheel, or as near as I can, at 350 watts. And we're doing 50 k's an hour, and we're coming into the headwind section. And he just keeps going. I eventually pull through when he just puts the parachute out, and I'm not really adding any more power than what I was doing sitting in his wheel. So holding 300 watts is all I can do. You can see DVL coming through behind me. I flicked the elbow pretty early, and he's pretty pissed off at having to pull another turn so quickly, but I've got absolutely nothing at this point. I'm so close to the rivet, and again, just trying to get back onto his wheel is a 400 watt effort. A bit later on, I had a bit of a moment here. I've pulled about 3 or 4 turns, either every other turn on the front or every third turn on the front. I've pulled my turn. Nicholas Schultz comes through, pulls his, and this guy in the Villawood kit just refuses to come through, and he's skipped just about every turn, or I've barely seen him on the front this race, and he's opened up so many gaps, or that's what it felt like to me in the race, and I just refused to chase and kept flicking the elbow at him until someone else came by. Unfortunately, no one actually did manage to get him to close that gap, and Jared Fife ended up doing most of the work with Angus Dixon in his wheel and Will Mathlen. But I mean, tell me what you'd do at that situation. Do you drop the guy off your wheel, or how do you get rid of someone who's just not pulling a turn and won't come through to the front? Had a bit of a chat afterwards with some of the riders, and it's like, even if you're not going to pull a turn on the front, at least hold the wheel till you get to the front and flick the elbow then, so you don't disrupt. So that was a bit frustrating. Here we are, half a lap later, and I'm not the only one who's getting frustrated. You can see Nicholas Schultz in the red kit on the left just waving him through. There's 4 guys gone up the road, and look who's just let the wheel go. It's Villawood. Frank does a monster effort to close the gap. I mean, Frank closed as many gaps as I did, if not more. He dropped himself a few laps ago and managed to TT himself back on. And the 2 of us actually ended up crossing the line together at the end. And here we go again. I've just pulled a turn on the front. And as I'm drifting back, Who just slots out a line, lets a gap open up. Same deal. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. It's racing. He's probably just as much on the rivet as the rest of us. But it's a bit disruptive and it's frustrating. Especially when at the end of the day he finishes well ahead of me. And look, here we are. We're about 2 laps from the end, and this is the beginning of the end for me. Nicholas Schultz flicks the elbow. Everyone has been working just about. I pulled my last turn. I'm pretty happy with 400 watts coming through here. I do my turn, flick the elbow myself. Frank, Jared come through. A couple of others. Angus hops on my wheel, and I'm like, I'm not closing that. I think Angus is trying to get the Villawood kit guy to close the gap himself. I've just pulled the turn. I'm not chasing that down. And then unfortunately, when someone does eventually decide that they're going to go across to it, I just don't have it in the legs to go with them. So here goes Nicholas Schultz with Angus in his wheel. Will Mathwin follows brilliantly. Daniel Vanderlaan and Villawood go after him. I'm sprinting with absolutely everything I've got, and right now the lights go out. And unfortunately, coming into the headwind section, there's absolutely no way I'm getting back on that. And that's pretty much the end of my race. I just see them disappear up the road. I've got a lap and a half to go. I finish out the race. I don't get lapped. And I actually end up catching up with Frank, who he also gets shelled at some point up here, and I catch up with him in the last couple of 100 metres. But look, I'd be keen to know your thoughts. What would you do when people keep dropping wheels and you have to chase? Do you just let the gap go out and hope that someone else will do it? Do you, or do you try to stay closer to the front so that you don't end up having to close gaps? But in that case, you do have to react really quickly, and you don't have that elastic of people filling in the gap for you. So what would you do? How would you race this race? I'd really be keen to hear from you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that one, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.